Okay, so Monique wanted me to tell you all a little bit about Enrichment Afternoons. And this is an option you have for your student at Ingleside. Charlotte Mason really believed that children needed to spend time out of doors. She really believed that they needed to memorialize that time in nature journals and also work with their hands just to create things of beauty and lasting value. And while we would love to include all that in our classroom time, it really isn't possible to go in depth. So that's why we're offering this option, and we're hoping that this will kickstart your children being able to do this at home in their own free afternoons. So this will be designated Wednesdays. We have a handout for it that we'll be emailing to you all. And just to explain a little bit about what I hope to accomplish during this time with students. It's going to be depending on the weather. When the weather is really favorable, we'll be doing a lot more work outside, and when it's not as favorable, we'll probably be doing more with the handicrafts. So the nature work we plan to do is basically just taking walks and learning the names of things. I have a lot of field guides like this one and like this one, and we're going to be learning the names of wildflowers. We're going to be reading stories about the wildflowers from the little nature library. We'll also be reading some bird stories, and we'll be keeping nature notebooks. So this is the nature notebook that I've kept for about 10 years now. Not that many entries for 10 years. This is a notebook that my daughter kept when she was about 7 or 8 years old. And this is an entry in my son's nature notebook. He's 14 now, and this was probably about 3 years ago. So we've not been as consistent as I'd like to be, but that's one reason why I'm really looking forward to this time as well for myself. So when we keep nature notebooks, we use a technique called dry brush watercolor. Each of your students already has a watercolor set here at Ingleside and a nature notebook that they can learn to do dry brush watercolor in. And dry brush is just a technique where you mix your paints and then you keep your brush as dry as possible when you dip it into the paint. So your brush basically becomes like a magic marker, and you can create incredible detail. And that's what Charlotte wanted the children to do, is to observe the incredible detail that already is in God's creation, in plants and in birds and in bugs, and be able to reproduce that with a dry brush watercolor technique. So we're going to be learning how to do that. And then for our handicrafts the first term, we're going to be learning how to knit. We're first going to make our own knitting needles. This is an example of a set that my daughter made when she was maybe 8 or 9 years old. And basically you take a wooden dowel and you sharpen it on one end, and then you take the other end and stick it in a Sculpey bead that you create. This is another Sculpey bead that my daughter made. And you just bake that off in the oven once you've got it created the way you want it to look, with different colors of Sculpey clay. And you stick the end of the stick into it to make the form. And then when it's baked off, it slips right on there, and you glue it. And I've had these for probably 15 years now, and they've really held up. I knit with them all the time. So we're going to first do a very small project of just doing and the children everybody's going to make knitting needles. Now the children who aren't comfortable using the knitting needles or have difficulty learning them, we're going to finger knit. And so this is an example of finger knitting. And this is a finger knit scarf that my son made. And he was probably about, maybe 8 years old too, maybe 9, I don't remember. But this is 3 strands of finger knitting that you just whip stitch together. And so this is another example of finger knitting. It's very simple to do, any child could do it. So once we finger knit or knit a length of something, we're going to take a walking stick that we find outside and just make a little grip for it out of the knitting that we do. And that's very simple. You just, again, just whip stitch it closed around the stick. So I started doing that tonight. You can see it right there. So, so that's the handicraft we're going to do the first term. After we finish doing that, we'll probably do a 9-patch quilt of knitted squares. And any other project they want to do. I mean, there could be scarves that are super easy to do. But we're going to branch out with their knitting skills and just create gifts for people and things like that. And then the second term, I hope to do a little quilting project. This is a little lap quilt my son did when he was 7. And you can see he just outlined the design in the fabric, and in the back you can see how that looks. So it's just a running stitch, very simple, but it keeps the fabric together in the quilt. And this is something he made and used his whole life probably until he was in high school. He had this on his bed. So we might do lap quilts like this, or we might do a little book bag using that same technique. So that's the second term's project. So the goal of it is really to learn skills that are lifelong skills that you can use your entire life to create things of beauty for yourself as well as for people you love. So that's our little Enrichment Afternoons, nature study, and in handicrafts. I hope you can come. Thanks.